Somewhere at an American border crossing today, a customs officer is holding a chocolate egg up to the light and treating it exactly like a bag of drugs. That's not a joke. A U.S. Customs spokesman once put it in plain words. "These are prohibited," he said, "just like narcotics are prohibited. Get caught bringing one across, and the reported fine can run as high as $2,500 for a piece of candy that children in more than 100 countries grew up eating without a second thought." So why is one specific chocolate egg contraband in the richest country on earth? Why does the same company that makes the banned one now sell a nearly identical version, legally, in every American store? And how exactly did they pull that off? Welcome to Poison Pantry. Let's open the file on the Kinder Surprise. To understand any of it, you have to go back to 1968, and to a man named Michel Ferrero. You might not know his name, you almost certainly know his work. His family's company invented Nutella. Ferrero had an idea, and it grew out of a very old Italian tradition. At Easter, parents there would give their children one large hollow chocolate egg, and tucked inside it, a small toy, one egg, once a year. Ferrero's question was simple, and a little bit brilliant. What if it didn't have to be once a year? What if a child could have that small jolt of surprise on any ordinary Tuesday? He handed the problem to a quiet collaborator named William Solis, a man who spent his whole career at Ferrero, and who would later wave off the credit, calling himself nothing more than the idea's material executor. Solis cracked it, a milk chocolate egg, lined with a thin layer of white chocolate, wrapped around a little plastic capsule. Inside that capsule a toy, sometimes whole, sometimes in pieces you snap together yourself. In 1974, it went on sale in Italy. And here's the thing that would matter more than anyone realized. It was never really about the chocolate. It was about the 10 seconds before you knew what was inside. And people loved it. Not liked, loved. The Kinder Surprise went from an Italian novelty to a fixture of childhood across the planet. Germany, Russia, the United Kingdom, most of Europe, Canada, the Middle East, tens of billions of them, sold. Ferrero would eventually tuck more than 10,000 different toys into those capsules, adding around 100 new ones every year. And a strange thing started to happen. The toys became collectibles. Grown adults began hunting the rare figurines, trading them, cataloging them. A candy built for 4-year-olds quietly grew a following of 40-year-olds. For a lot of the world, the whole thing turned into a sound and a feeling. The soft give of the foil as you twisted it open, the hollow crack of the shell, the rattle of the yellow capsule, the plastic yolk as you shook it against your ear, trying to guess. Here's what most people miss though. There was one enormous market where none of this ever happened. One country where you could not walk into a shop and buy this egg. Where in fact the government would take it right out of your hands. The largest candy market on earth. And to understand why, you have to stop thinking about the chocolate and start thinking about the toy. So let's talk about the toy. Because the danger inside a Kinder Surprise was never chemical. Nothing in that egg is poisonous. Nothing in it is toxic. The chocolate won't hurt you. The plastic won't hurt you. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else here. The hazard was mechanical. It came down to a simple brutal fact of size. A small hard object, and a small child's airway. When you're 2 or 3 years old, your windpipe is roughly the width of a drinking straw. Anything smaller than that can go down the wrong way and stop the air completely. Doctors have a clinical word for it: aspiration. Inhaling an object into the airway instead of swallowing it into the stomach. And the toys, remember, were sometimes designed to be assembled. Tiny wheels, a tiny axle, parts that could come loose, or start loose, small enough to fit in a curious mouth in the half-second a parent looks away. That was the whole problem. Not what the toy did, what the toy was. A choking hazard, sealed inside something a child was actively encouraged to bite into. And for years in most of the world, that risk stayed exactly where risk usually stays. Theoretical. A warning on a label, a thing that happens to other people, until it didn't. In the 1980s, in the United Kingdom, that theoretical risk stopped being theoretical. There were a small number of reported cases, and I'm going to handle these the way they deserve to be handled, which is carefully, of young children who died after swallowing parts of the toy inside these eggs. I'm not going to name them. They were 3 years old. That's all you need to know. And honestly, it's all anyone should need to know. Years later, one of those deaths surfaced again, when a grieving parent's letter was read aloud during a debate in the British Parliament on confectionery safety. The letter said, in plain and devastating words, that it had been a long time, and that nobody had taken any notice. Stay with that for a second, because it's the hinge of the whole story. In 1988, a European toy safety directive forced a redesign of the parts inside the eggs. Courts that looked at the deaths found the company not responsible in any way, and to this day every pack carries a warning, not suitable for children under 3. Ferrero followed every rule that existed, and that is exactly what makes the next part so hard to settle. Because here is where two governments looked at the identical facts and did two completely opposite things. Europe's answer was to regulate. Fix the toy, print the warning, keep selling the egg. America's answer was simpler, older, and absolute. Ban it outright, and the fight over which country was right has never actually ended. On one side, US regulators who will not blink. The law is the law, they say, and a warning label doesn't undo a dead child. On the other side, the company and a small army of frustrated fans, and their argument is genuinely hard to wave away. The toy, they point out, isn't really embedded in the chocolate. It floats free inside a sealed capsule. Ferrero's own director of institutional affairs said as much, noting he thought it was questionable the toy was embedded at all, before adding, pointedly, that the company never challenged the position anyway. And then the argument that lands hardest of all. Far more children choke and die every year on completely ordinary foods, grapes, hot dogs, hard round candy, than ever choked on this. Nobody bans grapes. Nobody bans hot dogs. Nobody stands at the border seizing bags of them like narcotics. So is this about a child's safety, or is it about something a lot less noble? Before we get to who actually wrote the rule that started all of this, and it's older and stranger than you'd guess, do the thing that keeps this channel alive. Subscribe. Hit the bell, because next week, we open another file you won't want to miss. Somebody new. They just didn't say it out loud. Because the rule that bans the Kinder Surprise wasn't written for the Kinder Surprise. It couldn't have been. It was signed into American law in 1938, 36 years before the egg even existed. It's called the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, and buried inside it is a single sentence that decides this whole thing. In plain terms, it says that any confectionery is adulterated, the legal word for banned, unfit for sale, if it has partially or completely embedded within it any non-nutritive object. Non-nutritive, meaning a thing with no food value, a thing you can't eat, a toy. Now, the law isn't stupid, it leaves one narrow door open. A non-food object is allowed if it serves a practical function for the candy itself. Think of a lollipop stick. It's not food, but you need it to hold the lollipop, so it passes. And that's precisely the door the Kinder Surprise cannot walk through. Because what function does a tiny plastic motorcycle serve for a chocolate egg? None. It's the whole point of the product, and legally, it's the fatal flaw. Here's the part nobody tells you though. The ban isn't one agency, it's a machine, with several moving parts, all pointed at one small egg. The FDA maintains something called Import Alert 34.02, a standing order that lets border agents detain these confections without even opening the box, on site. That alert was last updated in 2024. It is very much still on. Alongside it, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, a separate agency entirely, recalled Kinder Eggs off American shelves back in 1997, then issued a public warning to retailers again in 2006, flagging the toy as a choking and aspiration hazard for children under 3. And then there's the muscle at the actual border, US Customs and Border Protection, seizing the things by the tens of thousands. In 2011 alone, agents confiscated around 60,000 Kinder Eggs at the Canadian border. In 2015, another 30,000. 3 federal agencies, 1 chocolate egg. That is not an accident of bureaucracy. That is a country that decided, and keeps deciding, every single year. And people smuggled them anyway. Of course they did. Tell someone a chocolate egg is forbidden, and you haven't killed the craving. You've seasoned it. For decades, Kinder Surprise moved into the United States the way contraband always moves, in the trunk of a car coming down from Canada, tucked into a suitcase flying in from Germany, where they're called Kinder Überraschungseier. Slipped across a border after a trip to Europe. Most of it was small. A parent bringing back a dozen for the kids. A homesick expat grabbing a box. It almost never rose to the level of a real smuggling operation. But it was steady, and it was everywhere, and it produced that surreal quote we started with. A customs officer explaining, with a straight face, that his agents treat these the same way they treat a controlled substance. A chocolate egg, prohibited just like a narcotic. Which raises the obvious question, if Americans wanted them this badly, and clearly they did, why didn't the company just find a legal way in? Here's the thing, they did, and it's clever enough that it brings us all the way back to that promise from the very beginning of this video. Remember the near-identical egg that's legal in every American store? That's Kinder Joy, and it is a masterclass in reading a law closely. Ferrero didn't fight the statute, they didn't lobby to change it, they just looked at that one word, embedded, and engineered their way around it. Kinder Joy isn't a hollow chocolate egg with a toy inside. It's a plastic shell, shaped like an egg, that splits into two completely separate sealed halves. Open one side, and there's the treat. Layers of cocoa and milk cream, with a little spoon to eat it. Open the other side, and there's the toy. Sitting in its own compartment, touching no food at all. Nothing is embedded in anything. And just like that, the fatal flaw disappears. It clears the FDA. It clears the Consumer Product Safety Commission. In 2018, Kinder Joy landed on American shelves, legally, for the first time. The workaround that finally cracked the last major market on Earth. So here's the honest, slightly anticlimactic answer to the question you came in with. Can you buy a real Kinder Surprise in America today? No. It's still barred, right now, as you watch this. Can you buy its twin? Absolutely. It's probably at the gas station down the street. Same brand, same surprise. One very deliberate redesign and one word of a 1938 law standing between them. So let's clear up what almost everyone gets wrong about this. Because the internet has flattened it into a joke, and the truth is more uncomfortable than the joke. If you've heard of this ban at all, you've probably heard it framed one of two ways. Either America is a nanny state that outlawed a beloved candy over one freak accident, or the egg is some kind of death trap the rest of the world is too reckless to ban. Both of those are wrong. Start with the most important correction, the one this whole channel is built on. This egg is not toxic, it never was. There is no poison here, no tainted ingredient, no cover-up in a lab. It sits in a category all its own. A food banned not because of what it's made of, but because of what's tucked inside it. That's a different thing entirely from a fugu fish, or a bottle of the wrong moonshine, and blurring those lines is how people end up scared of the wrong stuff. But don't swing too far the other way either. The deaths were real. Children did die, and pretending otherwise to win an internet argument dishonors them. What's true is that even those cases were more complicated than a meme allows. In at least one, investigators found the child had eaten the chocolate and swallowed the toy as two separate events, not one clean bite. So the honest verdict is the boring one. It isn't nanny-state theater, and it isn't a killer candy. It's a blunt, 80-year-old rule, doing a real but narrow safety job, and reasonable people still disagree about whether a warning label would have done the same job better. Which is the part that stays with me, because in the end, this was never really about chocolate. Two governments were handed the exact same facts, the same deaths, the same warning label, and they answered one quiet, enormous question in opposite ways. Whose job is it to keep a child safe at the table? Europe said the parents. Here's the warning, you decide. America said the states. We'll decide for you, and we'll seize it at the border, to prove we mean it. Neither answer is obviously right. Both of them cost something, and every time an American kid cracks open a Kinder Joy at a gas station, blissfully unaware that its twin is technically contraband, they're holding the result of that argument in their hands. So I'll leave the file open on this one, and put it to you. Knowing everything you now know, the deaths, the workaround, the 80-year-old word at the center of it all, do you think America got this one right? Or should a warning label have been enough? Tell me below, I read them. Next week, we open another file. Until then, mind what's on your plate.